Hello and welcome back, everyone. Today we will be continuing our Jewish Japan run here in Victoria 3. Last episode we did the restoration. We did the restoration slow style, passing free trade ourselves rather than having ourselves opened up by a coconut and not using the Shogunate Rev. So it was a little bit slow, but it was also a little bit steady. We got some nice expansion spots. We went into South Africa. South America, but also South Africa. Down there, some of the efficient expansion spots in the early game, as well as setting ourselves up for a more thematic expansion into Qing, conquering much of Eastern Asia over the course of this run. Now, in the interim kind of tutorial episode, we really talked about the value of de-peasanting, and without going too much into the math, roughly speaking, when you turn peasants into not peasants, what will happen? In this case, we will see shopkeepers, machinists, laborers. This is the consequence of building additional logging camps. You actually produce additional value because peasants underconsume relative to their SOL. They have buy orders, but the buy orders don't reach the market. We will kind of gloss over the details on it, but just know that a logging camp produces roughly 15% more value than it appears to produce, at least with these PMs, because of the additional buy orders. And then we also notice something else kind of in between making that tutorial, which was a little bit of a mistake on our part, which is that in terms of the income on the pops, dependent income is 0.009 per pop for most professions. It's not the case for ownership, and it's not the case for peasants. For peasants, it's 0.004, so the value of de-peasanting is even bigger than we thought it was in that tutorial. With that said, we are going to become the rice warlord this episode. We are going to orient ourselves towards making the rice nice again, because rice is the best. And the reason why it's the best is because on a per construction basis, rice is the very, very best at de-peasanting, and you effectively double up on the value of de-peasanting relative to lumber camps, because the lumber camps here, they cost 200 construction. The rice costs 200 construction. And I know what you're saying, generalists, those are the same number. But the amount of people who get employed in rice farms is doubled. There's 10,000 employees per rice farm, which means that you will de-peasant twice as fast. It's only 100 construction to de-peasant 5,000 pops. And when you produce a rice farm, the value in excess of, kind of this balance plus the wages, which is normally how you look at value, it's about 40% more in terms of the value of de-peasanting. And so what we are going to be doing is we are going to be trying to make the rice as nice as possible. It should suffice because the rice is so very nice, and so we're going to go improve fertilizer as our opener and look for a nice little expansion. I think we're going to deck on China because they're weak and we want some of their states, so why don't we go for Hainan here, which is kind of the highest population state that is contiguous with us as our primary war goal here. And then we're going to look to release kind of other countries in China because we have some plans for enabling conversion, which is something we are struggling with. We are having a difficult time employing up buildings, government buildings in Beijing, because all the pops here are Han pops, and they are highly discriminated against because they are not of the Jewish religion, because we've gone state religion. So we got to figure out a way to convert them, which involves getting at least one Jewish pop all the way into Beijing. Now, we are going to wait a little bit before popping off really hard on the rice until we get that rice tech, but we will start auto-expanding it in Shikoku here. The reason being is that there is sulfur available. The sulfur feeds into the fertilizer feeds into the rice, and we get a nice little bit of vertical integration. It's important that we don't collapse the price of rice, and it's very easy to collapse the price of rice too much. However, decreasing the price of rice a little bit will be beneficial for us, because what this will allow us to do is it will allow us to increase the tax rate a little bit, because currently it's the number one expense and it is a little bit expensive. But to the end of also making sure that it doesn't get too cheap, we're going to start exporting rice. This will allow us to proportionally add more rice into our queue, and then we're going to be adding other things in order to try and make the rice as profitable as possible, so that we can keep abusing the fact that we can keep building more and more rice as we go here. To that end, we're probably going to lean into a very early one of our companies that is going to feed nicely into the rice. Now, it's not a rice company, but it is a unique Japanese company in Mitsui, which only requires 5 available building levels. We will want this in the capital, so of these 5 levels or 6 levels that are queued up on the clothing, 5 of them are queued up in the capital, which has a manufacturing edict. And so what we'll do is we will look to found Mitsui when this happens, and this will allow us to have cheaper fertilizer prices. The cheaper fertilizer prices will allow the buildings that use them as the inputs, a la the rice farms, to be even more profitable. And so this will help us out in order to, keep the profits up on this building, so that we can build proportionally relative to our entire economy much more rice farm. The war has also started, and it should be fairly straightforward. We went for a couple releases, as well as going for Hainan combined with Inner Mongolia, which is a fairly nice take. We should be able to push here, and we should be able to repeatedly land in China. If they actually, not with this into this here, but the fact that we can push when this 37 stack is busy is just fine. If the 37 stack ever assigns to a front, what we will do is we will instead start landing them mercilessly. But we can repeatedly land to some extent in the North China HQ, and there we see he's abdicated his position here. So what we're going to do is look to get a little sneaky landing down here. Regarding why we picked some of these war goals, some of them should be fairly intuitive. We're trying to paint the map kind of nicely, and having the contiguous land of Inner Mongolia and also Hainan will look nicer. But also, we are liberating Yue. Yue is not necessarily the best liberation, but it will hurt Great Britain. And also, what we are going to do is we have a special power block action that we haven't really highlighted yet: impose state religion. We currently do not have any Han Jewish pops in our states, which is causing us problems. What we're going to look to do is to subjugate a Chinese country, then impose state religion on them, and then generate some of their Jewish pops as migrants to our nation, in the hopes that we can start to employ up here in the states that we have taken in China. So the China war stalls out a bit due to, let's call, some optimistic mobilization, where we didn't mobilize as many conscripts as we should have, and also we can't kind of orient our conscripts to be way more artillery heavy, which is what we want, because we currently have an ongoing rev. This is, by the way, where one of the reasons we're running such a massive negative balance. We have not been able to delete some of the construction sectors we would like to delete, and we don't want to, or can't delete down military either, as a result of having this separatist movement going on forever, which is a little bit frustrating. We're not going to add any more military. Once we resolve this war, we should be in okay shape. I imagine China's not in very good shape either, but we get a little bit of a helping hand from Russia here, in that they've declared on China. What have they declared on China for? Just a kind of treaty port in the place that we are hoping to release before anything happens. So they will probably be returning Kirgiza, and this is it, because Shandong will likely be released by us before this is over, unless they just back down to Russia, which we hope that they don't. But this has softened up China, and now we are starting to push. Also, importantly, we did natural spread breach loading artillery, which is helping out quite a lot as we start to get in some more guys, and as our guys upgrade, we are getting a push. This is their capital here, so we just need to push through 2 states, and then we should be able to properly enforce on them. Our Mitsui company is alive and well. It doesn't own too many levels currently. It is headquartered in Kanto, in the capital, exactly where we wanted it to be, currently boosting up these textile mills, but we're hoping that soon it is able to start building and spamming fertilizer in order to make our rice farms more profitable. Taking a look at our rice farms, at the start of the episode, they had a productivity of something like 4. You do see the hitch up as a result of getting the new PM, but again, we have to be careful not to collapse grain prices, but we still have the opportunity to swap out to this, which will often be more profitable in kind of the aggregate. I think we want to focus on grain a little bit more now here, at least initially. We're going to see if we can do any more export routes, and we are going to export grain to a few more boyos. So the combination of foreign investment and high wages and de-peasanting considerations make this a very lucrative activity here. You can see that the weekly balance is 583, the wages are 2.5k, and so roughly speaking, in terms of the outputs of the building, 5/6 of this building value is captured in wages. Only 1/6 of the building's value is being purchased. So Prussia here got a raw deal because they bought the building for roughly 1/3 of the price it takes us to construct the building, but then we're getting 5/6 of the value, and we're extracting through income tax, so we're still extracting off the wages, although, to be fair, they are getting a little bit of skim because it's easier and better to extract from the upper class. We're, for example, not getting to dividends tax the ownership of the building that is present there, but they're paying a premium on the building of double in terms of what split they are getting in terms of getting the ownership amount versus the wages amount. But this is without considering the fact that we are getting an extra like 40% juice by turning peasants into non-peasants. And so this is hyper accelerating our economy because we are getting as much, or we are getting huge demands for consumer goods while we are doing this as a result of the peasants moving out from being peasants to instead being laborers and farmers here in the rice farms. So we really hope that this pattern continues where foreign ownership buys specifically our rice farms. If we take a look, we are using the mod that does show foreign ownership. We can see that 7% of our economy is owned by other players or other countries. We can see Prussia owns 34 levels, France owns 21, and Great Qing, they own 10, but this is just because we've taken states of theirs where they have ownership. And overseas, we own a little bit. A lot of it's in our subjects, specifically Persia. I think a lot of this is going to be opium, but we see a lot also in the French Empire. This is likely due to the fact that RQ is going to prioritize France over other countries in the event that France actually has happy industrialists, because their industrialists, which are happy, do get a state construction efficiency bonus. Your private queue will care about construction efficiency, so we're expecting to see more French buildings than other types of buildings being purchased out from RQ. So we reach great success here in Hebei, where we have had an edict for greener grass campaigns. We thought that this, or I believe that this was our highest attraction state that was a Han primary state in terms of migration attraction. So we put down a greener grass campaign here, and we are rewarded with some Jewish pops. Some Jewish pops arrived. Looks like maybe Hakka or maybe Manchu. We had some Manchu pops over here that were Jewish, importantly, and so the presence of them being able to go over here, it means in Hebei we can now employ up in government buildings. So what we're going to do is we're going to move this over to Beijing. We had another plan in terms of enforcing, state religion on one of these Chinese countries, which we're probably going to do, because when you do the enforce the state religion interaction for the block, what you will get is all of them will gain a little bit of Jewish pops, or they will be seated in all of their states. The reason we're not enforcing religion on all of our kind of groups in our block member is because we're actually getting a pretty strong modifier from not enforcing on them, in that if we take a look here, they will be paying us plus 50% income that they would normally be tithing up to us as a result of the power block interaction or divine economics here, where we will be getting plus 50% income transfer from heathen subjects, which is going to allow us to peel quite a bit off of them. I think you can get pretty close to 100% if you stack all of the modifiers. This is going to be something that we are watching and keeping an eye on moving forward. So initially we were going to hold on to our principal or mandate slot that we had gotten, but we see that we have dropped below the threshold for generating maximum mandate, and so what we're going to do is we're going to go divine economics at level 3, which will incidentally increase our cohesion target so that we will be generating maxed mandate. But also very importantly, what this does is it increases wages for state religion pops. Now, in the aggregate, I think this is probably not necessarily the best modifier, because it decreases the value of decreased government wages because these modifiers stack additively. But that being said, with the loud car outside, we do have an interesting thing going on with the buildings that we are selling, off to other pops, which is that we are going to get an increasingly high percentage. You can see now like 88% of the value of the rice farm is in the wages. Now, we do have to be a little bit concerned, because if this weekly balance becomes too small, the dividends aren't going to be able to pay out in the cash reserves, and the buildings will start firing off, and this is maybe a risk that we'll have to deal with, or we'll explore dealing with it, because we haven't wage maxed before. But when this building gets sold off, we're only selling off like 11% of the value for like 33% of the cost, which is an absolute steal. It's just absolutely insane for us. We're also getting some buildings that are being built, in our country honestly, because the AI just kind of looks at productivity. I don't think they care about the differentiation between whether or not something is wage heavy or if it is dividends heavy, when in reality they should, because what they are getting is just the dividends. Here, though, this, for example, is great. They're getting paid out a whole lot, but a lot of this is just this being insanely profitable because the company, the French company, is building here in Rhone, and by doing this, they are managing to extract out quite a bit of value. We've also been struggling a little bit to turn up PMs. We should be able to turn that up now, though. But this means that there's a ton of extra throughput. Extra throughput makes extra balance, but what we could do, we could be a little bit sneaky. We can add on top of this, you know, we can produce our own and sort of steal the throughput bonus from France a little bit, because the throughput bonus gets applied to all the levels, not just the buildings owned by the French company, and so it'll be profitable for us to, you know, kind of effectively steal their company levels here in Beijing in the coal mine. So we see a good opportunity here to get Shandong for free. We see that they will offer support. They won't offer become subject, but boy oh boy are they close. And so perhaps with a little bit of, you know, government change magic, where we slot in the type of people that they are interested in, which is the landowners, we will be able to convince them that, hey, you know, they actually would be delighted to become our protectorate. We see the +4 acceptance. We will side in here. We will damage relations with Mexico and Great Britain over this, but a free subject is a free subject, and we should have a pretty easy time both defending ourselves and sending an army over to defend Shandong against any sort of landings. I think we'll mobilize this troop as well, and we should be pretty hard to get into because they have to get a naval landing down. We can mobilize even more armies, but this should be fairly straightforward as we're waiting for our infamy to tick down. We also have added a ton of construction. We're absolutely flying in terms of the economy here, in terms of how fast we are coming up right here as we have made this rice warlord adjustment, and we are selling off buildings and really de-peasanting our pops quite quickly, giving us more opportunities for, you know, profitable buildings, like having really profitable textile mills as these prices start to come up here as a result of the increased demand. Mitsui is a little bit slow to get off the ground, but we do see it acquire its first additional building in a fertilizer plant in Beijing, which we're delighted about, although we are not pushing rice in Beijing, of course, because everything north of the Yellow River, generally speaking, in terms of Chinese geography and agriculture, tends to be wheat oriented, and everything south of it tends to be, you know, the rice orientation. So this new province we took, this is in the rice kind of sphere, and we do have an auto expand going in on it, and it is also setting up for sulfur and fertilizer as well, which will feed into, you know, the entire big rice, big nice, big warlord machine. This war is a little bit spooky because there is a means by which we can get enforced out, and then our subject can get enforced out because there's war goals on us, and we have to make sure that we take Namaqualand and Heroland and keep them under control. But for Shandong and also just the homeland, we should have a pretty easy time defending here. As far as war goals that they have on Great Britain, they have war reparations, which is a bit of an unfortunate one because it's really hard for us to get any sort of war reparations on GB unless they've revved. In which case, if they've revved at some point in this game and we just never noticed they revved, they usually incorporate the Falkland Islands, but it looks like they haven't revved yet, and so we are left trying to figure out ways to land these spots to make sure we don't get enforced on. It might be a little bit sketchy, and worst case scenario, we lose these lands, but that's not overall too big a deal. We've just barely started colonizing them, so that should be fine enough. We see several landings coming in here. Oh, that's a lot of landings. That's a lot of landings. I mean, fortunately we have a lot of guys here, so we can defend against a lot of landings. We're going to mobilize some conscripts. We might want to split these guys up so that we don't get split on the landings too much. And what that means is we might want to make it sure that these guys, in terms of their formation settings, will not lend to each other too much, because we don't want all of our armies getting caught up defending just a single landing so that the other ones get in for free. So we are resisting all the landings here without needing to do anything too crazy other than have a bunch of guys parked here and, of course, Russia's decided to help out in the parking department. We've also been kind of trying to maneuver our navy around repeatedly to land these places. They're trying to re-land behind. We do have the South African army kind of defending, but it's also kind of a 4-stack, so it's not really that useful. But now with us having 2 of these war goals in, and us just being super okay with just a white peace, not needing to enforce on Great Britain, I'm thinking that we're probably going to be tidying up this war soon, which is great because we're almost at 0 infamy, so that we can go for Korea here and just full annex them. We're having a little bit of trouble with minimum standard of living, staying above it, being able to tax as much as we would like, so we're deciding to invest quite a bit in bureaucracy with the idea of pushing up the health system. Notably, tax waste is a huge waste of sound, which is why we have the loud motorcycle outside, but more importantly, tax waste is a money deletion modifier, kind of like the reverse of the value of de-peasanting, and so to the extent that we are paying for bureaucracy, it's not quite as expensive as it looks. So what we've been doing is we're pushing areas that don't have enough tax, that have plenty of government-able pops, so plenty of Jewish pops. We don't want to build in Hainan, for example, because we don't have Jewish pops there to employ in the government buildings, and then we're pushing them up to economies of scale, which is, for us, currently at 20, if I recall correctly. Actually, it's at 30, so we can push up a couple of these other ones a little bit, but we're not just trying to push only to 30. For example, we're not going to push in Shukogu anymore, even though there's paper there and it's slightly cheaper there, because we're not overcoming any tax waste or any sort of negative modifier here, and we would prefer to overcome these. But this is what we'll be doing as we look to push up our SOLs so that we can run a higher tax bracket. Notably, also, the halves don't really matter for anything because there isn't a rounding system, so you're either at a standard of living level or you're not, and so the only increments that matter for standard of living are 2 and 4 here, and so we do want to be pushing that on up, especially to level 2. A quick war for us, and we annex Korea, which of course is going to be fantastic. We do not get any sort of journal entry. I thought we would get a journal entry on annexing Korea where we get claims on Manchuria, but this is not the case, so we will probably be looking to annex Manchuria with our next major war in 24 months, when our truce with them is going to be up. Another thing to note is that Rice is just disgustingly efficient at expanding your credit line. We've kind of been throttling things quite a bit here. In terms of how much line of credit individual buildings add, there's going to be a few sources. One, half your GDP gets added to the credit line, so any building that increases your GDP is going to add quite a bit, but also the reserves, the cash reserves of buildings are going to add lines of credit, and Rice Farm is kind of 2 buildings in the price, or for the price of 1, in 2 buildings in 1, and you can see that it is giving us a credit line of 210k there. If we take a look at another building that is going to be, 210k for how many levels? For 7 levels here. This is the idea, so 30k a level, and it's a 200 cost building, remember that. And if we take a look at a tooling workshop, a 600 cost building, it's also 30k, so it doesn't scale up with the price of the building, so spamming and focusing on low construction cost buildings will allow you to, for a longer period of time, avoid default. And we're like full throttling it. We're looking to grow as fast as possible. We're kicking things up pretty hard, especially considering we're not even on steel frame buildings yet. Things usually really kick off when you hit steel frame buildings. We're not even at that very important breakpoint that is going to be coming in for us. I think following that, we kind of want to get onto pump jacks because there's a company we want to do, but we also need a company slot, so we'll probably do that afterwards. And be able to really kind of kick things up. But right now, it looks like we're in trouble, but because of the types of buildings that are getting constructed in our market are like a ton of 200 and 400 construction cost buildings, it's actually not anywhere near as scary as it looks, especially because we picked up a nice little chunk of credit from Korea. We are not full throttling, I suppose, in the sense that in Korea, we turned all their construction sectors down onto wooden frame. We'd normally just delete off a few, shave off a few, and also shave off, in particular, any sort of universities that are not level 1, so we'd shave this down to level 1 or just entirely delete it. We maybe keep the one in Kyushu, but the problem is with this movement, we can't delete anything. So if this movement ever goes away, we'll look to get the universities kind of pared down a little bit, probably actually just deleting all of the ones except for the ones in Kanto, where we are going for something for economies of scale. Let's get that up because our current economies of scale is 30, and we definitely want to be pushing that. Universities benefiting a lot from throughput. Stacking them up in one spot is very, very good because most of their cost is in the wages. Wages don't increase as throughput increases, just the input goods cost, in this case paper, and so generally speaking, pushing throughput is going to make them more efficient unless you're using them for qualifications reasons. So we finally open up our new slot for principal group, and we are going to go food standardization 1. We do want to lean into spamming, importantly, pop growth stuff as a kind of thing to explore and stack with the Jewish faith because they have minus mortality, and here we will be getting agriculture throughput, which incidentally, we still have a lot of peasants. This is going to be really, really good because it applies to subsistence farms, and it's going to help to bring up SOL quite a bit, but also the later levels we will see minus mortality will allow us to do more pop growth, and then finally the plus standard of living will allow us to run higher taxes. It'll increase standard of living, which incidentally will also increase it's wealth level that increases pop growth and not standard of living if I recall correctly, but also we'll see this efficient canning practices PM, which if I'm not mistaken relative to the other PMs uses more grain. The better canning practices uses more grain, which of course we want to create grain demand, and we're going to lean into food industries as well. So this was going to be fantastic for us as we kind of continue our de-peasanting quest. Really, the gamefully employed in the last few years, I think, has doubled, and so we're starting to really, really slough off quite a bit of peasants here, which of course is very much so the idea. And so despite running a balance that looks really spooky, we actually have a similar proportion of our credit limit filled. It's just that our credit limit is much larger. I think last time we took a look we were at 80 million for our limit. Now it's at 94 million. If you always stay at 80% of your limit and just never increase that limit, but you just acquire debt as quickly as your credit line is going up, then you will never become bankrupt. Of course, we do have to be a little bit careful, and the reason that we're running auto expands instead of actively pushing a whole ton of rice, although we can push it a little bit, is because if we were to collapse the price of rice and every single one of these buildings, their cash reserves drain, then our credit limit comes down. And if our credit limit comes down while we're kind of throttling it and pushing 90, 95, 99% of our credit limit, that's going to be bad news bears because that's going to become a situation that we just can't really recover from. So Hebei remains the only place where we have Han Jewish peasants that is in kind of a Han homeland. We're still looking to get them to migrate. We're still hoping that they migrate. We're also swapping up onto steel frame buildings in a few key areas. Hebei, Beijing, which isn't even really employed, and also in Kanto. I think we could also swap up over here, but other than that, we are kindly throttling things really, really hard. So what we're going to do is we're going to look to downsize some of our levels in areas where we know they won't be the best because we don't have a source of iron there. This type of stuff like Kansai, we don't have a source of iron there. Why don't we delete those? And we will similarly just delete in various places, especially the ones that don't have iron. But it looks like we have almost entirely places that have iron here now. So, maybe we delete some of these. But we're just going to look to delete and recomp and try and move towards being more steel frame building. This minus 200k, this is a little bit too much for us to bear, so we will have to cut costs in some various places. We have notably also hit an inflection point where we have become the world's biggest GDP, just barely edging out both the Raj and Great Britain, but certainly not the two of them combined, although it's worth noting in some sort of technical sense, Great Britain is the biggest GDP. The reason being, we do have this mod, it is in the description, where it shows your ownership, what percentage of your buildings you own, and what percentage of other people's buildings you own, and you see that Great Britain owns a total ownership of 175% of buildings relative to its own GDP, and we own less than 100%. We own a total of 98% of our GDP, so Great Britain is still quite a bit ahead of us here, but we do own, in fact, we own under 100% here, and it is a bit interesting. We will eventually be able to, enforce privatization or enforce taking the levels from these guys in both the French Empire and Prussia. This is a long-term plan of ours to just take the ownership back once it gets sufficiently large. from them using the war goal of what is this, a forced nationalization, but we won't be doing that just quite yet, and so as it stands, we are still selling off our buildings. Interestingly, we've seen that this building, in terms of the amount that is going to balance versus wages, recomp quite a bit, and now it's about 75% towards wages, but we still overall like the kind of play pattern of selling off these buildings. And also, as we run out of labor, which we're still really far away from, we can turn on labor saving PMs to make the building less profitable but use less workers, and this will eat into the balance rather than eating into the wages, although it'll eat into the wages a little bit, but it only fires off the pops that get paid the very least. We're so far away from that, though. We're still in de-peasant mode. We still have 7.2 million gainfully employed and 24 million peasants, so it'll be a long time before we care about any sort of labor-saving PM. So we have now seeded Jewish pops in both Hainan and Shaanxi. Unfortunately, still not having them in Beijing. We were running an edict to try and pull pops to Hainan. We got rid of that edict, and now the edict in Beijing is the last one that remains, trying to seed some Han pops into Beijing that are Jewish. We're going to work towards incorporating these and putting in quite a bit government administrations so that we can afford to incorporate these, because we want to start taxing these pops straight away. And also now, finally, these government administrations should start being able to employ up, now that they have Jewish pops, to be able to work inside of them. So, much like how, in retrospect, we probably should have gone cultural exclusion just so that we could get a good enough acceptance to get the ball rolling in a bunch of stuff, we probably also should have gone homesteading. And a big reason why going homesteading over tenant farmers would have made some sense is that tenant farmers disallows internal migration for peasants. Now, this is often not the biggest deal in the world, but what it does for us is, if we seed a pop with Jewish pops, and these pops, want to move, and they're peasants, they can't move when they have tenant farmers here. And so if we take a look at kind of some of the Jewish pops that we have, we will see that they are peasants, or there is a peasant population here. We also do see Xinjiang also get seeded here with Jewish pops. I think there's about 20k here, which is going to be good, because once they have been seeded, then they can start converting. So some pops initially came over, and now they are busy converting, still waiting on Beijing, the very, very critical province, but we're going to look to incorporate Xinjiang as well, or it's already incorporated. Fantastic. The one that is kind of a little bit more difficult to incorporate is Hainan, and that's because that's a pretty big nut to eat up front here, with 2.6k bureaucracy, wanting to get that up and going before we start incorporating. So I think we're probably going to wait for full incorporation on some of these other states, fully economically integrate them. We are kind of running into, we're maybe going a little bit too close to the sun in terms of our balance. And a big part of this is, I think that, look, the government wages are insanely high. And we are paying a really large amount on government wages, and a big part of this is us stacking these modifiers that I really don't think are good, but we're certainly having an interesting time stacking them. This increased wages for state religion pops, it's additively stacking as far as we can tell, with decreased gov wages, and so normally you're not paying this much gov wages for what you're trying to get done, and so it is quite a bit uncomfortable that we have these. We're going to look to stack even more. There's also a company in Isfahan that someone pointed out, since our kind of last discussion that we had, or our last episode, that can give you even more state religion kind of pops here. We'll pull it up. Here we have it here, just a clothing company, so a little bit less efficient with the fact that, we already have a clothing company or plans for a clothing company, but this does give, as its prosperity bonus, a 20% wages for state religion pop. We are going for Manchuria. Had a little bit of a think whether or not we wanted to go for them in 2 bites or one singular bite, but by going for them in 1 bite, we make it very, very unlikely that they would back down, and in particular, we're trying to swiggity-swooty these gold mines here. This is going to help out our balance quite a lot. We will look to spam this, and we get Russia siding with Yakutia. Interesting. We could reset relations with Russia here. I don't think that's critically important, and it didn't look like Russia was going to side against us here in Manchuria, but these guys aren't going to back down because this is a full annex play, and so we should be able to get going on kind of integrating all of this. And also, you know, this big kind of Japanese incursion into the mainland of East Asia, it's going to look very nice for the thumbnail as well. So we get a nice annexation here on all of Manchuria, taking it all in a pretty easy war. And also, we unlock corporatism, which is a pretty nice tech for us, considering we are leaning into the devout, because now they acquire the corporatist ideology, which is a little bit better than kind of what they had before. They will endorse religious school and charity hospitals, of course, but they also do like regulatory bodies, which is going to be a nice pass for us, and a pass that's going to allow us to continue to maintain our positive approval. We haven't dipped under max approval with the devout this entire run, and in doing so, we are of course maintaining this incredibly high education access, as well as the minus 5% mortality, which incidentally is applying even in the unincorporated portions of the now newly enlarged, newly big Empire of Japan here. It's almost the size, in terms of landmass, of Great Qing, although I think even at this point we might even have more population than Great Qing. We have 135 million souls under our control, and if we take a look in the ledger, we should be able to see who has the absolute most souls, which everyone knows is the most valuable resource in Victoria 3. Of course, the thing is still bugged, so we can't sort by that column, but if we take a look over here, they still have 252 million. Okay. Just kidding. We didn't mean it. We never meant any of it. A very important breakpoint. Health system has now been increased to level 4. This is going to give us the first, the full SOL point, at least to the places that are incorporated, because it doesn't count if it's half a standard of living bonus, only if it's a full one, so we are getting +2 standard of living. Also, minus 20% mortality stacked with, you know, our devout bonus is going to be minus 25% mortality, so the pops are not dying very much at all. If we take a look at our pop graph, we can see that we're mainly step laddering, and we haven't gotten too exponential here with the pop growth, but a big part of that is our SOL is really low, and the target SOL, generally speaking, unless you stack a ton of modifiers, which we are doing, is around 20 SOL, but even if you stack a ton of modifiers, this makes it so that 10 SOL is going to be better for growth. Even if you stack a ton, so that 10 is best, 20 will still be really good. So we're going to be pulling up SOL, but also, or that's wealth level rather, but also SOL is going to come up here. And so as a result of this health system, because this also affecting positive standard of living is going to help us with the radicalism issue a little bit. Being above expected is going to be nice. We see that we are, of course, getting a ton of radicals from our recent conquests, and we do have the Jewish party has formed. Let's see who's in the Jewish party here. That is going to be just the devout. All right, makes sense. Fair enough. And in terms of the voting, they are going to be looking probably pretty good. Nope, the agrarian party is going to be looking in the lead here. So we are going to have some flexibility with this group, because I think we should be able to slot that in with the progressive party at the same time, and that will work well for us, or the constitutional reform party in the Intelligentsia. And so we'll have a little bit of flexibility for passing laws coming up too. The Taking Socialist movement finally pops, and we are going to choose to do regulatory bodies, which incidentally is also going to remove dangerous working conditions, which is going to further allow us to grow more and more pops. We're going to leave this at level 1 for an extended period of time, though, because the bureaucracy cost is a little bit expensive, and generally speaking, the more productive your pops are, the more valuable institutions become, and currently we still have an enormous amount of peasants, despite being really de-peasanting oriented. We are kind of increasing gainfully employed and keeping the peasants at bay at a similar number this entire time, while gainfully employed has been cranking up rather rapidly. We're also adding a bunch of territory, which in doing so, we also add a bunch of peasants. Yikes, though. We have 1.3 million unemployed, and these are pops that you really, really want to get under control. You really want to get handled, because this is going to negatively affect growth. So what we're going to do for the unemployed pops is we're going to come in here, we're going to sort by domestic, and we're going to sort by unemployed, and we're going to see where we have the most unemployed pops, and we're going to start being a little bit more aggressive. We see it's in Beijing. We have a sneaking suspicion that part of this is because stuff is being built over. Oh no, it's not. It's just pop growth. Wow. Okay, so if stuff is getting built and it's agrarian and it's not a rice farm, what's going to happen with the subsistence rice farms is this place per level only employing 5k pops, but per level of rice farm that it overrides 10k, and so this can generally cause massive unemployment. One of our strategies we were going to have for seeding Jewish pops was going to be subjugate Yue, and then convert them to being Jewish, and then in Yue, just build a whole bunch of dye plantations, force a bunch of unemployed pops, and hope that those unemployed Jewish pops migrate over to our nation. This was our plan, but things are looking rather well on that front, without that sort of assistance, and so I don't think it'll be quite necessary, because we are getting these pops seeded more and more easily, it seems, so people are starting to convert. We also, because these modifiers stack additively, and we have a bunch of modifiers that are giving conversion rate, both in here, and also religious convocation, I believe, gives conversion. This is one of the reasons we're not using the edict, because it's proportionally less effective, but this is probably the first time we've ever considered using this edict, because as these pops start to get converted, they start to being able to be used in government jobs, which incidentally is allowing these to be employed up, which is getting rid of tax waste. We have a lot of tax waste in these areas, and as more of these get employed up, we can push the institutions, but more importantly get closer and closer to incorporating Hainan, which is again really a whole lot to pay for. Coming back to the idea, though, is wherever we have unemployed pops, we really want to more aggressively spam these high de-peasanting buildings, but the high de-peasanting buildings that aren't rice farms, because the rice farms won't give additional jobs to unemployed pops, because they'll fire a further 100 pops that are currently working in a subsistence farm, or they'll fire 10,000 pops and then they'll hire 10,000 pops, so that will be net no acquisition in jobs. And so what we're going to do in places that are currently experiencing unemployment, we're going to look to push specifically logging camps and fishing wharves, which are and also whaling stations, but there's no whaling station that has unemployment. We are going to push all of these things pretty aggressively in the queue here in order to try and pick up these unemployed pops, and we cannot use rice for this purpose because it's not going to net create jobs, and it'll in fact be net negative on jobs when we do eventually put in any sort of labor-saving PM on the rice farms, because this will make it so that they hire less than 10,000 pops as we reduce this through the labor-saving PMs. Which rice farm, the disadvantage is they don't get access to all of them. So we have what is likely to be an extraordinarily good opportunity here to subjugate Yue for free. If we come in and we see what the chances of them doing this become subject is, it's -17. But we barely have any kind of ideological similarity in our government, and what we can do is we can swap our government to look just like their government. Now their government is just the landowners and the landowners only. So what we're going to do is we're going to swap over our government. We will do this. And also, we can take on their debt to get an obligation from them anyways. We won't be ticking our law anymore because, of course, we're too illegitimate. But now we can try and sway in on this. This will give us negative diplomatic catalysts with countries that don't like landowners, but this is worth it to get a subject for free. For freezies, good dealsies. Incidentally, this will brick both the treaty ports that are here, both the British one and the Portuguese one, because we are not an eligible target for their treaty port, and we will also be able to, in 5 years' time, convert Yue and do the little trick we were talking about earlier in order to pull all the pops, or all the Jewish pops, over to our nation here. This is kind of a factor that we don't really think about that often, but is probably one that is pretty valuable, is that the urbanization per urban center decreases the amount of urbanization required in order to create an urban center, and this can be a powerful tool for de-peasanting as well, because it's free jobs that are being obtained here in the urban center. Now, if the urban center can't employ up all the way, it's not necessarily useful, and so ideally we would want to make these buildings more profitable so they employ up more. So pushing intentionally stuff like glass and engines would maybe make a little bit of sense, but definitely pushing coal, because coal, only a 400 construction cost building. If we can get the price of coal to come down and get these urban centers to be more profitable, then this will be pretty effective for us for being able to, de-peasant even further pops. So we see these 122,000 coming in. Also, in regards to our tech tree, we're going to go for shift work, increasing the cap for economies of scale. We are planning on going to university level 50. We do want to play a little bit of catch up. We're already at 35, and so making use of this is going to be nice. But also, there are several, government administrations. We're currently at the economies of scale cap of 30, and this is what we're pushing in order to get maximum throughput on our buildings. But we still have tax inefficiency in some of these places, and so being able to push more is going to be valuable for being able to get the very most out of our, spending that we are putting in on our government administrations as we start to push them beyond 30. Because if we take a look here and we sort by tax, we can see that there are stuff like Kansai where we are already pushing over level 30. In particular, pushing a little bit more in Kansai, because Kansai is one of the places where we have a solid amount of unemployed pops, and so looking to just give them some government jobs. The perfect thing to drive down the price of transportation, coal, and glass is, of course, going to be the South Manchuria Railway Company. We did have to complete an additional railway up here in North Jilin to be able to slot it in, but this is an absolutely fantastic company that is unique to Japan because it requires you having done the journal entry for the Honorable Restoration, which of course only Japan can do. And so now companies are developing quite nicely, and this one is going to be nice from the perspective of the urban center, which is kind of an interesting sort of perspective to operate from. We've never really tried to push urban center employment super aggressively. Something we could do is subsidize. We've experimented with this a little bit before, several patches ago, and it's just bad to subsidize this stuff, but this is something you could do if you wanted to absolutely positively de-peasant as much as possible. But as this company gets going, we should have a bit of a come up here. We are probably going to look to push glass quite a bit more. We can see the auto queue is building a lot of glass, and in the queue we added one level of coal mine in a whole bunch of places and set it on auto expand in all these places in order to keep stuff up, but also in order to try and get the urban centers in various places to try and employ up. You could see services being cheap is going to be a very common thing, not particularly in the capital though, where we have more of an ownership class, but in general we don't really have that much of an ownership class relative to kind of a normal game, because even though we have overseas ownership equal to 10% of our GDP in terms of what we own overseas, around 20% of our own country is owned by foreign nationals, in particular France and Prussia leading the pack with around 6% apiece. And so them owning this stuff is part of why we've been able to absolutely throttle a super negative balance, much more negative than we've had before. Although our construction dropped, I think that must be pops that were working in construction sectors not firing, but we haven't really been pushing too much our debt in terms of the proportion of the bar. Now, a big part of this is last time we took a look at this, we had a credit limit of 100 million, and now it's 114 million. It is increasing very fast as our GDP increases very fast, and also as we acquire more reserve on buildings, because building reserve limit is proportion, or is it is not relative to the amount of construction, but proportional to the number of buildings. So relatively speaking, the 200 cost buildings are going to give you more of a credit limit than other ones, and in particular, a great pusher of this has been for us so far the rice farm, which we are auto expanding in several areas. So despite running a balance that looks absolutely atrocious, we've been able to kind of hold it at bay. It's been a little bit scary, but it is apparently quite quite manageable for us here in Japan. You know, the power of rice, it is so nice. It shall suffice to keep this economy going. So for our next tech, we are going to start doing zeppelins ahead of time, and we are going to be much more aggressive about doing stuff ahead of time. Now, we have a bunch of stuff unresearched, so I think what we're going to do is probably, once zeppelins gets to the threshold of around 15k researched, what we're going to do is we're probably going to swap to either malaria prevention or multilateral alliances and look to complete all of these very critical tier 4 technologies, or at the same time here in the society sphere. In terms of production, we could go for dynamite. Dynamite would be pretty reasonable. So would or steel railway cars, because we are having a little bit of a hard time getting the Manchuria company prosperous, although the prosperity bonus is a little bit less what we're after. They unfortunately only took 5 railways for what they have, and so getting them productive is going to be difficult. They are stationed in Beijing, and what we've done is we've actually started to use all the labor-saving PMs here, which is a bit antithetical to our goal of de-peasanting as much POPs as possible, but I just wanted to take a quick look at our trade routes in terms of what we're doing, and it is a strategy that is built around us wanting to focus on stuff like grain in terms of our queue, and also increase the SOL of our POPs, and also lean into our various companies. So if we take a look, we are importing ammunition, not that efficient thing to produce yourself, although to be fair, fertilizer does feed into it, and we maybe don't need to be importing this much. It was largely a relic of when we were running a shortage. Why don't we delete the French route here? Oop, we immediately run a shortage. See, that's why we don't do that. But also, we are doing stuff like exporting coal. We are trying to make coal more cheap, generally speaking, as a result of slotting in our company. But while we have the company, we would prefer to have more coal buildings in our country overall, and so exporting coal would definitely fit with that. We are also importing the consumer end goods of this stuff. Here we have furniture. We're exporting a ton of grain in order to facilitate, us building more rice farms in particular, although I guess we're importing a little bit from Zulu and arbitraging it. China has cut off any sort of trade with us. We are exporting softwood. Again, 200 construction cost building. We do want more of those. As the price comes up, it gets easier for our auto queue to build more of them and more profitable for them to do so. We are exporting iron. We have an iron company. We have been cut off there. We will probably look and see if we can get another couple exports. We are exporting also liquor, which is an output on our groceries. We want our grocers to be more profitable. We would export groceries as well if that was profitable. We might be exporting groceries, but that is something that we can feed our grain into, and eventually we are going to use the grocery company. We're importing steel. 800 construction cost building. Don't necessarily want to produce it ourselves. We want to create buy orders, even though steel creates a lot of buy orders in terms of the production of steel, because it has a ton of inputs, and so in doing this can stimulate buy orders for both iron and coal. We don't really have that many good states for producing steel in Japan, in mainland Japan. We do in China now, so as these kind of crank up, especially Shaanxi, this will be nice. But just importing the steel is kind of a fine way to go about it. We're exporting sugar, which is an output, part of the output for the rice farms. We're exporting sulfur. Sulfur is one of the most kind of effective industries. Generally speaking, in terms of the PM, it's like the best industry, and so exporting it is nice. I don't think we have a company for sulfur, and it is an input for fertilizer. So, okay, we are I thought we were importing this stuff. We can stop exporting, I think, our tea, because we do not want to be building more tea, especially because it will cause buildings when tea farms build over a rice farm, it causes unemployment. So we actually actively don't want to be doing that. We must have had collapsed price before, which was the reason to be doing that. And we could see here, finally, we are exporting a whole bunch of wood, really looking to get all of our logging camps and all of our fisheries built as quickly as possible. Incidentally, leading into the fish in terms of our population is going to cause them to consume more fish, so it's a little antagonistic with consuming grain, but it's also going to help to decrease SOL as we spam it, and so we could export fish in order to try and push more fish, but it's really not that productive, so it's fine enough. We are creating a lot of jobs with our fishery things anyways, and this will, to the extent that they are not profitable and we overbuild fishing wharves, to that extent it will positively affect SOL, and if they are wildly profitable because it's expensive, we have more of them, and so we're kind of okay with that. And so we are building our entire trade strategy around this de-peasant as fast as possible kind of approach we're having, because we have so many, like just a disgusting amount of peasants. I'm certainly disgusted. And then we especially want to get rid of these unemployed pops and to give these guys jobs as quickly as possible. So investment rights with Brazil is a little bit of an interesting prospect, because the AI does care about construction efficiency when it comes to how they choose to build and what they choose to build. And in particular, Brazil has a lot of states that have negative state construction efficiency, particularly here in the Amazonas. It's definitely far, far worse in the likes of Chile, Peru, and Bolivia. But the fact that they have some malices might make it a little bit more likely for them to invest in us. We're pursuing these investment agreements anyways, to kind of play around with this mechanic, even though we don't think it's strong. So we're going to go for that and get an investment agreement here with Brazil. They are going to accept, which is going to be good for us, except it's probably not going to be good for us. I mean, maybe it is good for us, because it actually... Look, if the main idea is de-peasanting and to be rice and to be nice and to create demand for various consumer goods because you de-peasanted all these pops in order to allow stuff like rice to become more profitable, if this is the entire gambit, you have to figure that in to some degree, the value of selling off your buildings here. Also, incidentally, we do see this interesting phenomena here, which in terms of our evaluation of foreign investment, whether or not we think it's good or bad, we don't see too often, which is that their government is constructing buildings in us. Usually it tends to be the financial districts, or at least from what I've observed, although I'm not sitting watching the screen perhaps as closely as I should. But if their government sells off something, or if their government constructs something, then it's going to sell off. And we actually have an investment pool that's kind of built up that we've been trying to drain without breaking the bank completely. And so the fact that we have an investment pool means that we might end up purchasing this anyways. But also, as we were going to point out, we have gotten up to food standardization level 2, which is going to give us more minus mortality. So we got 20% from health system, 5% from the Jewish faith, and an additional 10% here for minus 35% mortality, which is going to be quite strong for us for being able to grow the pops. I think we're going to take a last look at a couple things and then wrap this episode up. Our credit line has increased to 3 million since our last check-in, which wasn't too long ago, but we're holding steady with about 80% of our credit limit filled up. This is kind of the threshold where we are going to start getting a little bit more cagey, although we have added 40 construction, in that if we start to get close to 90, we are going to start to delete construction and do various ways of pulling back. Eventually you get a feel for like kind of what you can tolerate, and the alarm bells start going off. Our alarm bells have kind of been a little bit off this run because, or at least this episode, because we've been thinking that we shouldn't be able to hold this amount of deficit given the size of our economy, and yet we have. And I think that foreign investment is the confound for our kind of normal feelings, but that's kind of the way things are. We are, in all the areas we're incorporating, we are tamping down the radicalism pretty well, but the areas that aren't incorporated, it's not happening so much. We are up to 9 million gainfully employed, kind of holding the peasants right now at 25 million, although next episode we'll probably be taking Chinese states and really be adding to this peasant list, and so this is going to be a bit unfortunate. We do break in up over 10 SOL here, just kind of churn up quite a bit in the last few years here, bringing this up, which is going to help with the pop growth and a bunch of other various things. The literacy has come down as we have started to incorporate the Chinese states. It's probably never going to get above 90% again until we manage to increase our institutions for education, and also we hit the pretty important 100 billion GDP breakpoint with the knowledge that we effectively have 9 to 93-ish million worth of GDP rather than 100 million in terms of ownership. But something that is nice about foreign investment is that minting at least up to 100 million GDP is informed by your GDP, and so having foreign ownership to the point or to the purpose of jumping up minting is going to be pretty valuable. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I hope the rice was nice. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. Do the YouTube algorithm thing. And other than that, have a good one.